ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. Good morning from New York and good afternoon for those joining us from the Middle East. Welcome to the annual event of the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, held on the margins of the Commission on the Status of Women. On behalf of the committee, let me express our appreciation for your presence here today. Since its creation in 1975, this committee has worked to promote the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination, as provided by international law and enshrined in the UN Charter. Our mandate is regularly renewed by the General Assembly. The committee's activities on the question of Palestine aim at mobilizing efforts to end the Israeli occupation and at achieving the realization of the two-state solution and a sustainable peace as per its mandate. The committee raises awareness on the question of Palestine and the challenges faced daily by the Palestinian population. In so doing, it engages with civil society in the occupied Palestinian territory, Israel, and elsewhere. With events like the one we are holding today, the committee also promotes the advocacy and outreach among the general public on the challenges faced by the Palestinian women and their active role as part of finding a solution. We are in difficult moments, and we should use today's event to bring the focus sharply to the plight of the Palestinian people. Let me therefore welcome to today's event an outstanding all-female panel composed of Ms. Amy Cohen. She is the Director of International Relations and Advocacy at the Israeli NGO Amin. I believe it stands for City of Nations or City of Peoples, which focuses on Jerusalem within the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We are also joined by Ms. Reem Hamad and Ms. Amani Odeh. Both are residents of the East Jerusalem neighborhoods of Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, respectively. They will share their personal experiences with us. Last but not least, Ms. Masara Muscroft, Head of Office of OCHA in the occupied Palestinian territory, and Ms. Maggieh, the Program Coordinator of UN Women at the Palestine Country Office, will join us. While participation in the virtual platform will be limited to UN member and observer states, as well as the panelists, the general public can watch the event on UN Web TV, and you can send your questions via the committee Facebook page or the Twitter account. The email is dpr-meeting@un.org. And the WhatsApp account is +1 646 421 0579. I repeat, +1 646 421 0579. Dear colleagues, the theme of today's event, impact of forced displacement on Palestinian women, is sadly too relevant and of utmost importance. Since 1967, Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, have forced the displacement of Palestinians, including Bedouin and refugee communities, while further entrenching the occupation. In recent months, Israeli authorities have enforced or attempted to enforce evictions of Palestinian residents from their homes in the neighborhoods of Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan to give their homes to Jewish settlers. These two neighborhoods have been at the forefront of protests and social media campaigns to resist displacement. As a result, Palestinian residents in East Jerusalem have endured violent attacks by Israeli settlers and disproportionate use of force by the Israeli security forces. While the ongoing Israeli policies and practices have found consequences on the entire Palestinian population, it is women who bear most of the collective burden of such policies, which result in forced family separation, displacement, threats to their physical integrity, arrest and detention of their children, as well as discrimination in almost every aspect of life. This is the focus of our discussion today. Let us therefore start our panel discussion. I would like to give the floor this morning to each of the panelists for short briefings on their respective topics and areas. After these interventions, I will open the floor for comments by committee members and observers, followed by a question and answer discussion with questions and comments from the audience. Firstly, let me give the floor to Ambassador Feda Abdelhadi Nasser, who is a Deputy Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations. Ambassador Abdelhadi Nasser, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Neville. I'm honored to join you today as we consider the impact of decades of illegal policies and practices by the Israeli occupation on Palestinian women. These practices have systematically and violently forced them, their children and families from their homes and their homeland, and have had such traumatic consequences on their lives, on the enjoyment of their human rights, and on the prospects for the peaceful and secure life that the Palestinian people have so long sought. We are grateful to the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for gathering us in this forum and for its long years of advocacy and support for the Palestinian people's rights and a just solution to the Palestine question based on international law and relevant UN resolutions. Special thanks to you, Ambassador Neville Gertze, for chairing today's event and for Namibia's unwavering support and solidarity to Palestine. I also wish to express appreciation to the distinguished panelists who have agreed to join us today to share their testimonies and perspectives. Ms. Hamad, Ms. Odeh, Ms. Muscroft, Ms. Cohen, and Ms. Maggieh. I'm certain that we all agree that in the struggle to realize justice and freedom for the Palestinian people, the role of women is central, and the contributions they can make, if included, respected, and elevated, are invaluable. And of course, the importance of women's role in peace building is not distinct to Palestine, but applicable globally, as we see from history. But it is with distinct pride that I can say that Palestinian women have always been at the forefront of our just struggle. And they have joined with their counterparts worldwide in seeking to advance women's rights and their inclusion in peacemaking, including in follow-up to Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. As the 66th session of the Commission of the Status of Women convenes, we reiterate our appeal for the promise of Resolution 1325 to be upheld. Palestinian women yearn for peace and yet are deprived of this aspiration and of all their human rights by Israel's colonial occupation and apartheid regime. The facts are irrefutable. Grave human rights violations are being perpetrated by the occupying forces and extremist settlers alongside and enabled by discriminatory, racist, and punitive laws enacted by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people that are the cause of the violence, repression, and constant threats of displacement and dispossession in causing severe distress for Palestinian women, undermining their human security, depriving them of the sanctity and safety of their homes, and affecting their ability to care for their children and families and to pursue their livelihoods. A home is supposed to be a safe place, but it is unfortunately not for the countless Palestinian women and children whose homes have been seized or demolished or destroyed, whether in the occupied West Bank, including in East Jerusalem, or in Gaza. Palestinian people face the daily threat of displacement by an illegal colonial occupation, which has been tormenting our people for decades, simply for being Palestinians, for rejecting this cruel occupation, and for trying to live peaceably in their homeland, and which from the onset of this injustice decades ago to the present has been deliberate in its intent to remove our people from their homes and land in order to replace them with Israeli Jewish settlers. This reality, one in which war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed every single day by Israel with absolute impunity, is what the Palestinian people have long suffered. Today, like many others, Azhar Nasser Abutin, a mother of three who lives in the village of Walaja between occupied Jerusalem and Bethlehem, lives with the constant fear and anxiety of the possibility of yet another forced displacement. She and her family are among 257 Palestinians, including 128 children in the village, who do not know if they will have a home in weeks to come. In her words, and I quote, "I come from a refugee family. We grew up displaced. This is our first home away from the refugee camp on our land. If they demolish our house, what will we do? My eldest is 6 years old. Where will we go? There is no mercy or humanity." End quote. On her behalf, and on behalf of all Palestinian women and families facing this reality, we ask these same questions of the international community today and reiterate our continual appeal to all states to uphold the universal laws meant to safeguard human rights and ensure the protection of civilians in armed conflict without exception. Everyone has the right to a home, everyone should feel safe in their home, and everyone should live in dignity, free from want, violence, and repression. Palestinians must not be excluded from universal human rights. International law, including the Charter and UN resolutions, must apply to all states, no matter how big or powerful, privileging none and protecting all, including women. And I thank you and very much look forward to the testimonies and presentations today by our distinguished panelists.
Ambassador Abdelhadi Nasser, thank you very much for your heartfelt presentation and for framing the issue of our event today. We are at the moment where we are dealing with status of women at the United Nations, and you could not have put us in a stronger position this morning to understand the real impact of what this crucial subject has on the women in Palestine. I would like now to call on the first panelist, Ms. Amy Cohen. She has been the Director of International Relations and Advocacy for Amin since 2019. She is the organization's chief liaison to the international community concerning geopolitical and human rights developments in Jerusalem. She conducts policy advocacy for key stakeholders and decision makers around the globe, including in Europe and here in the United States. Ms. Cohen, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, the Chair, Vice Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, the Deputy Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations, and member states for the opportunity to join you here today and to speak on the historical background and legal implications of forced displacement in East Jerusalem, which will help us to better understand what are the underlying drivers of displacement and how that impacts Palestinian women disproportionately in East Jerusalem in particular. And as it was mentioned, since Israel's occupation and unilateral annexation of East Jerusalem in 1967, of course in contravention to international law, consecutive Israeli governments have employed a system of policies and practices to entrench both Israeli territorial control and to alter the demographic composition of the city. And as such, many of these measures have served as levers of displacement aimed at weakening the Palestinian presence in Jerusalem, while eroding conditions for any future Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem within an agreed upon political resolution. Over the years, these policies have included land confiscation and settlement construction, denial of full citizenship and political rights, permanent residency revocations, insufficient service provision, and severe restrictions on urban planning and building in Palestinian East Jerusalem. In more recent years, however, home demolitions and evictions of Palestinian families have increasingly served as a mechanism of displacement and dispossession, driving Palestinians from both their individual homes and their collective home of Jerusalem. These measures severely violate Palestinian rights to housing and shelter, and the right to family and community life as an occupied minority group protected under international law. The home, therefore, has inherently become the front line in the political battle over the future of Jerusalem and in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a whole. This battle over the home is precisely what mobilized the remarkable Palestinian grassroots resistance around pending evictions in Sheikh Jarrah last year, which not only succeeded in garnering global attention, but has become a symbol and the face of the Palestinian struggle today. Such threats to the security of the home have a disproportionate impact on Palestinian women and children. These women are traditional caretakers of the home, and they are the backbone of Palestinian family and community life. And so these attempted measures of Palestinian displacement have actually recently increased in scope and in scale in an unprecedented manner, whereby entire Palestinian communities across East Jerusalem are simultaneously under impending threat of expulsion. These processes of displacement are particularly being carried out in the area known as the Old City Basin. This is the Old City and the adjacent ring of Palestinian neighborhoods. These 7 square kilometers are considered the most religiously and politically sensitive area in the city and inherently a core issue of the conflict. Why? Because of the concentration of holy sites and historical assets in its bounds, most notably the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount. Evictions of Palestinian families, wide-scale home demolitions, and Israeli touristic settlement initiatives assume a central role in both transforming the ethno-national and religious character of the space, but also consolidating Israeli control and entrenching the occupation over this area. Sheikh Jarrah, as I mentioned before, located on the northern edge of the Old City Basin, and Silwan to the south, are the 2 neighborhoods within this area that are under the greatest pressure from the state and from settler groups. Over 150 Palestinian families today, numbering more than 1,000 people, are at risk of mass eviction from the homes in Batan al-Hawa Silwan and Sheikh Jarrah due to discriminatory Israeli laws. What is this legal framework, and how is it utilized to displace Palestinians? These legal mechanisms essentially exclusively afford Jewish Israelis with the right to reclaim assets in East Jerusalem, once owned by Jews prior to 1948, now inhabited by Palestinians, while at the same time depriving Palestinians of the same right to recover property lost on the Israeli side of the Green Line during the same war. Many of these families that are facing eviction lawsuits today are Palestinian refugees who lost homes in what became Israel in 1948 and now stand to be displaced for a second or even third time. Over the years, settler groups working in collusion with state bodies have acted to secure land ownership rights of these assets. And from this platform, they then exploit these legal mechanisms to file eviction lawsuits against Palestinian families to seize their homes, despite having no connection to the previous Jewish owners or occupants of these properties. And although successive Israeli governments continue to characterize these cases as ordinary property disputes between private individuals, They are rather part and parcel of a systematic campaign aimed at uprooting Palestinian families and supplanting them with Jewish settlers to expand Israeli settlement and further transform Palestinian neighborhoods into Israeli spaces. Now, in parallel to these eviction threats, I must mention the risk of mass demolition, which loom over some 200 homes in Al Bustan, Wadi Yusul, and El Walajeh, placing another 2,500 Palestinians at risk of displacement. Well, Al Bustan and Wadi Yusul are located in Silwan, in the heart of the Old City Basin, where much of the eviction attempts are taking place. El Walajeh is a traditional Palestinian agricultural village situated along the southern edge of East Jerusalem, whose northern section was annexed to Israel in 1967 and integrated into the Jerusalem municipality. A decisive Supreme Court hearing, an Israeli Supreme Court hearing, concerning 38 homes in El Walajeh is actually scheduled for next week and could immediately accelerate demolition. This comes on the heels of 30 homes that have already been razed in the past 5 years in El Walajeh. What is the legal and policy framework behind these mass demolition orders? In all of these areas, demolition orders have been issued under the pretext of lacking building permits, which are nearly impossible to procure. Why? Due to the absence of proper zoning plans, which the Israeli authorities have systematically neglected to advance and or approve. Moreover, Israeli planning authorities have continually blocked efforts by residents in these areas to authorize their homes and promote plans to enable residential development of their communities. So while thousands of housing units are advanced in zoning plans for Israeli neighborhoods and settlements across Jerusalem, little to no plans with even a modest number of housing units are promoted for Palestinian areas, despite the fact that Palestinians constitute nearly 40% of the city's population. Yet a devastating number of home demolitions continue to take place year after year due to a reality directly created by the Israeli government's abdication of responsibility and intentional discriminatory planning policies. Beyond the physical loss of one's home and shelter and its direct impact on a family's safety and security, demolitions contribute to the rising poverty rates in East Jerusalem, currently hovering around 78%, which carry far-reaching implications on Palestinian women and children. These ongoing disparities in the city's urban planning has long served as a continuous lever of Palestinian displacement from the city. And as this battle continues to loom over the Palestinian home, it not only infringes on the individual and collective rights of Palestinians, but also has an acute detrimental impact on the lives of women. Such measures of displacement violate international law and contravene UN Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 2334 and notably Resolution 1325, which specifically addresses both the vulnerability of women in conflict zones and also their unique contribution to peace building and security. It is therefore essential to secure and to safeguard both the individual and the collective home of Palestinians in East Jerusalem as a core issue of foreign policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At the same time, it is vital to include the needs, voices, and full participation of women from East Jerusalem who have been sidelined from processes of conflict mitigation, peace building, and efforts to establish true justice. Thank you.
Ms. Cohen, I thank you for your intervention on the legal framework and for really highlighting the gravity of the displacement and home demolitions policies of the Israeli authorities. Bringing to sharp focus for us the violation of Palestinian rights to safety and security of the home. And I think none of us can deny that when issues address you within your own home, then it's when you appreciate the gravity and the importance of that security that you need. And to make it on a larger scale now to speak about the collective home of the Palestinian people. This is something that this committee needs to continue to work on with the rest of the international community. Ladies and gentlemen, the second panelist is Ms. Reem Hamad. She is an inclusive educator of the NGO called Terre des Hommes Italy, based in Jerusalem. She was born and raised in the Karm al-Jaouni neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. She completed a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry and is a certified pharmacy technician. Before hearing from Ms. Hamad, we will show a 1-minute video produced by OCHA showing her daily life in Sheikh Jarrah. Can we have a look at the video first, please?
Ever since I opened my eyes to the world, I have been hearing about court cases and being threatened with eviction. This started in 1972. I wasn't even born yet when the cases in the court started. My name is Reem Hamad. I was born and raised in this house in Sheikh Jarrah. Our house is our basic right as human beings, and the thought of not having this house kills me inside. Being uprooted from your house is just totally unfair, inhumane, and unjust. To me, my home is where I find my peace of mind. My home is where I find people I love, people I cherish. My home is where all my dreams and hopes started and grew. My home is where I hope to be and stay and die. We are supposed to love each other. This world was built for everybody. I don't see why we should have this much hatred in our hearts for each other.
Now that we have had a look at the video, may I now call on Ms. Hamad to speak to us. Ms. Hamad, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this committee's meeting. It is very much appreciated, and it is my honor to represent the women of Sheikh Jarrah. I, Reem Hamad, a 40-year-old mother of 4, who was born and raised in the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, Karm al-Jaouni in particular, a neighborhood that consists of 28 residential units that are all under the constant threat of forced displacement and ethnic cleansing. All of the neighbors, including my family, are refugees from all over Palestine. As for my family, my grandfather was forced to leave Haifa during the Nakba in 1948 and came to Jerusalem to seek shelter and was then granted the house that we're recently in by the UNRWA and the Jordanian government due to meeting all the criteria that they required. My family moved in 1956. My father was only 5 at that time. He lived all his life in this house. He grew up and got married and had us 4 kids in this house. I was born in 1981, and ever since I was able to construct sentences and was aware of things around me, I became responsible for going around the neighborhood to distribute invitations for meetings to discuss urgent issues related to the court cases raised against the residents by the settler organizations that claim ownership over the land. As a child, the most terrifying thing was always the trip back from school. The thought of coming home to find it taken over by the settlers was always overshadowing my thoughts. After growing up, getting married, having kids, this feeling didn't fade at all, particularly when we received the eviction orders in 2020. We as a community started having meetings and brainstorming about different ways we can fight for our right, our basic right, our homes. without using violence. So one of our neighbors, Mona Al-Kurdi, might have heard of her, started with her social media campaign, the hashtag Save Sheikh Jarrah. This helped in raising the awareness about our case. Shortly after the launching of this campaign, we started having supporters from all over Palestine, as well as international supporters coming and peacefully demonstrating in front of our homes, and I'm sure everybody's seen that. We used to sit down, chant, sing, raise our voices against the injustice that we are enduring. Israeli forces responded by attacking the demonstrators and the supporters that were in the neighborhood. They used many vicious means to do so, some of which were pepper spray, sound bombs, rubber bullets, and sewage water. The sewage water was sprayed almost every night and was intentionally aimed at homes. It created a lot of health problems for my children, myself, and a lot of other neighbors and people that were with us in support and solidarity. Many of us developed a very bad rash that took months to go away and was very disturbing, let alone the bad smell that was very hard to get rid of. They also used to fire gas bombs inside the houses, which terrified the children and affected their health due to some having pulmonary problems. This also caused a lot of psychological problems for the children in particular. They experienced insomnia. They would get so scared when they hear any small sound after all of the events that went on in the neighborhood. They didn't want to go to school, especially after the neighborhood was blocked by the Israeli forces and the residents were to be checked every time they are to enter. And as settlers became more and more violent, a lot of the kids were threatened and attacked, as well as imprisoned on their way to school or as they returned home. This, for sure, is no way for any child to live in this world. Children are supposed to live their childhood in peace and harmony. But the kids of Sheikh Jarrah and many other areas of Palestine, unfortunately, are deprived of the simplest right, and that is to live a proper and healthy childhood. I ask for your continuous support in protecting all children of Palestine and hope that one day those children can be granted a life where they won't have to worry about losing one of their family members, their home, be imprisoned, attacked, or discriminated against. A life where they are not haunted by death and displacement. A life where they are free and safe. A life where they can see tomorrow coming with their hopes and dreams to fulfill. Well, you might say, but Reem, you didn't say anything or you didn't mention anything about the impact of all of this, on women. Well, isn't seeing your child struggling to fall asleep going to have a bad impact on me as a mother? Isn't seeing my father suffocate and having difficulty breathing going to impact me? My brother beaten, my daughter attacked, my husband discriminated against. Isn't all of this going to impact me as a woman? I thank you for your time. Thanks.
Ms. Hamad, thank you so much for sharing your personal and touching experience. I can assure you, coming from a history of apartheid discrimination in Namibia, I can relate to many of that insecurities that you have described so painfully to us. May I now call on our third panelist, who is Ms. Amani Odeh. She is a dentist and a resident of Silwan in East Jerusalem, where her family home is under an imminent threat of demolition. She is a member of the Save Silwan campaign and of the Silwan Neighborhood Defense Committee. We look forward to listen to Ms. Odeh. You have the floor, madam.
Hello, I hope everyone is good. I am Amani Odeh. I am a dentist from Jerusalem. I live in Silwan. I am can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed. We can hear you loud and clear.
I am a mother of 2 children. I live in Al Bustan neighborhood. Al Bustan neighborhood is one of the neighborhoods of Silwan, located in Jerusalem, which faces the threat of demolishing at any moment due to the distribution of demolishing orders and notices for the residents in it in 2005. We are talking about 100 houses, 1,500 people who live in Al Bustan. The story of Al Bustan neighborhood is not strange. It's the same as other 6 neighborhoods in Silwan, as there is 13 neighborhoods in Silwan. 6 of them have the threat of demolishing and evacuation in any moment. As we are speaking, the municipality, the occupation municipality, attempt to demolish those houses. As a result of those notifications, the townspeople faced almost daily arresting and clashes between them and between the police, and because of the living of the settlers between the houses and the people, we are always having those clashes. Even at night, at morning, always you can hear that there is clashes in Silwan. The number of detained children is almost the highest in Silwan, as a case of the arresting and investigations for children. When we are talking about children, we are talking about children from 5 years old till 18 years old, and also the arresting of the eldest men and people. For me, I am from a family in which the father and the brothers were arrested. And then even once I was arrested because they said that it's for investigation. And they arrest me at night from my house, from the side of my child. And that's because we have an active role in defending Al Bustan neighborhood, and because we are part of the defending committee in the neighborhood. We as a family always have those problems, and it's not our story only as Odeh family. It's the story of a lot of families that live in Silwan. As a woman and mother from Al Bustan, I often find myself forced to abandon my role as a mother and to act as activist. Because I have to have this presence in Al Bustan Foundation and in Al Bustan neighborhood, and in Save Silwan campaign, this campaign that we released at the social media in order to increase the awareness about what is happening in Silwan and about what is happening in Al Bustan neighborhood, and to try to make this advocacy and to gain the pressure that we need to stop all the demolishing orders in the neighborhood. I face this daily pressure that I have this feeling that I have to leave the house and to let my children in the most safe place that I have, my home. But instead of letting them in a safe environment and in safe place, I have this time and this thinking that I am leaving them in the most dangerous place, also my house, because I have this demolishing order in any moment, and it can happen even that I am in the work. So I have the possibility of getting back to see my house being destroyed, my children being arrested, and I have nothing to do because as Arab people live in Jerusalem, we have no rights as other people who live in Jerusalem, and we can lose even the only place that we have, our houses. Thank you.
Ms. Odeh, I thank you for sharing your personal experience, including your Save Silwan campaign. I want you to know that we think of you and we understand the fears that you are going through, the insecurities you are facing, and we wish you all the best. Can I now invite our fourth panelist, who is Masara Muscroft. She is the head of Office for the UN Office for the Coordination Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, in the occupied Palestinian territory. She assumed this function in January 2019, following 4 years in Jordan as the head of the Office of OCHA. Ms. Muscroft joined OCHA in 2001, working in Sierra Leone, including as head of their country office, and undertook numerous other field assignments as well as various roles at the headquarters in New York. Ms. Muscroft, due to other engagements, will have to leave us before the conclusion of the event. So I'd like to hand over to her quickly. Ms. Muscroft will show us a PowerPoint presentation. Ms. Muscroft, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, the Chair. Your Excellency, Feda Abdel Hadi Nasser, the Deputy Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine, Member State colleagues, UN partners, ladies and gentlemen, a good morning to you in New York, good afternoon to those of you in the Middle East, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I am going to share a PowerPoint presentation with you, so I will just share my screen now. Hopefully that's working. Yeah, it's coming up now. So we have heard the very personal testimonies of both Reem and Amani this morning, who have grown up under a life of occupation. And you've also heard from my colleague, Amy Cohen from Amin, on the historical context of the displacement, specifically in East Jerusalem itself. What I would like to do today is place this now into the broader context of the impact of the occupation on the entirety of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and of course, in parts on Gaza as well, and the current impact that this has on the lives of people living in the West Bank today. Israel's occupation has multiple dimensions which are pervasive and impact on all aspects of daily lives in ways that you and I, as non-Palestinians, cannot comprehend or even imagine. And unless you really have been to the West Bank, or indeed to Gaza, you cannot really understand what the blockade in Gaza and the barrier around the West Bank mean, and the impact that this has on daily lives. We see the evictions that you've heard about, and Amy described so eloquently, and Reem and Amani have spoken to, demolitions, including demolitions by the Israeli authorities, but also self-demolitions, where Palestinians are compelled to demolish their homes because of the exorbitant fees that are imposed otherwise, restrictive planning regimes, constrained access, which includes farmers to their land, travel by Palestinians to Al-Quds and the holy sites of Jerusalem, and even limited access to reach places of work. My own staff have to apply constantly for permits in order to travel from their homes to their place of work. And then we have settler violence, which is sadly on the increase, and the impact of settlements and outposts in the West Bank, and the disproportionate use of force that the chair mentioned at the outset of this meeting. These are all microaggressions which Palestinians face daily and collectively create what we refer to as a coercive environment, which have a disproportionate impact on women and children. They rob Palestinians of the sanctity and the safety of their home, as Feda has explained earlier, and the dignity of living their lives and the full enjoyment of their rights as individuals. And this coercive environment often compels individuals to move, to seek better circumstances and safety and a place where they can live in dignity. So let's take a quick look at each of these elements. The first one is evictions. Amy described this very clearly. What you're seeing now is a map of Sheikh Jarrah, where I am actually speaking to you from right now. But this is only one of the areas that is impacted by evictions. And as Amy described, this also includes the Old City Basin, Silwan, Obastan. These are all areas that are equally affected by evictions. And as Amy has so eloquently explained, most of these evictions are based upon old historic title from hundreds of years ago, and in some instances the Ottoman rule, and are used to claim ownership of properties that Palestinian families have lived in for generations. Presently, to date rather, 80 families have been evicted from the Old City in Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, all of which are in East Jerusalem, since 2017. And this has also included, during this period, well actually since 2008, over 60 refugee families who already were multiply displaced. Currently, 270 Palestinians, 63 households are at risk of forced eviction in Sheikh Jarrah alone. And 970 Palestinians, which includes 424 children, 218 households, face evictions, which are mostly brought by these settler organizations. Many of these settler organizations are actually based outside of Israel itself and funded and supported through the Jewish diaspora. The impact that this has on evictions was starkly witnessed on the 19th of January of earlier this year, when in the early hours of the morning, the Salih family of 13, including 9 children, were evicted in the middle of the night in driving rain and cold conditions. And currently the Salam family, who are just around the corner from this office where I sit, 12 people, including 6 children and their elderly mother, are at risk of eviction. Now, whilst we welcome the recent ruling of the Supreme Court of Israel to suspend the eviction process for some of the families in Sheikh Jarrah, this is only four families that are currently covered by this ruling. There are many more that face evictions, and this is not a resolution to this issue. The next point is around demolitions in the West Bank. Demolitions happen daily across the West Bank. Our office monitors these demolition orders. They monitor the demolitions themselves, and they go and immediately visit the families that are exposed to these actions and trigger response, humanitarian response. And I receive these alerts 3, 4, 5 times a day, and this is across the whole of the West Bank. And the reason for these demolitions is given that they lack formal building permits. Now, between January 2017 and February 2022, over 3,352 structures have been demolished, and this includes over 695 donor-funded structures, which have been put in place to provide humanitarian assistance, mostly in Area C of the West Bank. And in total has displaced over 4,000 Palestinians, including over 2,000 children. And this has included 751 residential structures and, as I said, livelihood structures. And this has a profound effect, as Reem and Amani have told us, on just the well-being of the Palestinians who are affected. Currently, 55 schools providing basic education to Bedouin communities across the West Bank have outstanding demolition orders. And again, this is all due to a lack of building permits issued by the Israeli jurisdiction. Now, interestingly, only 1% of Area C and 13% of East Jerusalem have applications or have approved plans. And only 2% of Palestinian building permit applications have been approved between January 2017 and February 2022 in East Jerusalem. I think what this shows is that there is simply not an equitable planning regimen. And again, Amy described this very eloquently. And this slide in itself starkly shows the challenge of obtaining authorized permits under the current regime. As you can see, the blue lines show the number of applications over the years, and the very small orange lines, which you can barely see, are the permits that have been issued to Palestinians in Area C. Now, together with our partners, we work to advocate for a more just planning regime. Again, the direct link between demolitions and displacement can very clearly be seen by this slide, showing you the figures over the years. And as you can see, there has been an increase in the number of demolitions and the number of people displaced concurrently, with a small dip in 2018, but they have increased year by year. Now, the pledge of the Israeli authorities made just this month to suspend demolitions during the upcoming holy month of Ramadan and the holy Jewish holidays that are coming up is welcomed. But let's be clear, this is just a temporary pause, and again, is no solution. I want to touch very briefly also on the impact of settlements. A significant issue has been the expansion of settlements over the years, and this is most pronounced, of course, in Area C. There are over 250 separate settlements or outposts in the West Bank, with an estimated population of around 660,000 Jewish Israelis, compared to an estimated 360,000 Palestinians. Interestingly, when we look at where demolitions take place, we see that they happen within 1 kilometer of settlements, and 91% happen within 3 kilometers of settlements. The pattern and the relation between this demolitions and settlements is extremely clear. Now, of course, one very unfortunate side of the presence of the settlements in the West Bank is settler violence. Over the course of the last years, we have seen both an increase and a change in the nature, the extent, and the scope of settler violence. From 2017, January 2017 through to February 2022, we have recorded over 1,772 separate incidents, causing the death of 13 Palestinians and injuring 630 Palestinians. In this time, it should be noted, of course, that 15 Israeli settlers have also been killed and 360 settlers injured. The tensions that are created in the communities by this proximity, by the competition for land, etc., unfortunately result in this insidious sort of aspect of settlement expansion in the West Bank. You will see from this slide that settler violence is increasing, manifest in last year's protests and violence in Beta in the Northern Jordan Valley. And as I said, the nature and the extent of settler violence is changing. In the last 10 years, what we've seen is the geographic extent expanding, and also we've seen it coming from sort of attacks in fields now to direct incursions into people's home. And this was starkly seen in September of last year, when a young 3-year-old boy was struck by a stone in his, on his head whilst he was sleeping in his home in the southern Hebron Hills. The Israelis did take action against this, but again, this is far too infrequent and impunity tends to prevail. These tensions and ramifications throughout the occupied Palestinian territory also overflow into Israel as well, and all too readily evident in yesterday's ramming and stabbing attack by an Israeli Arab in Beersheba, killing 4 Israeli civilians. Now, it should be acknowledged that Lapid, the foreign minister, has stated this is not the Israel that they see themselves to be, but greater efforts must be made to bring perpetrators to account. The final issue that I want to touch on is the disproportionate use of force. And all too readily, often we are seeing what we would call excessive use of force. We have seen in each of the escalations in Gaza since 2008, we have seen over 4,000 Palestinians, including 1,000 children, killed. 214 Palestinians, over 36,000 injured during the Great March of Return, which took place between 2018 and 2019 in Gaza. And in the latest escalation in May 2021, 261 Palestinians were killed, including 67 children. In 2022 so far, 18 Palestinians, including 4 children, have been killed. This compares to 2 killed in 2021 in the same period, and 7 in 2020. This shows that there is an alarming increase in this. And in the same period, 18 Israelis have been killed and 18 Israelis have been injured and 5 killed. This clearly is a serious issue that we need to address, and we seek to work with both parties to reduce the violence and to mitigate the impact of the occupation. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. All of this information that I provided today is available on our website. I apologize for not being able to stay longer, but again, thank you for this opportunity. So thank you.
Ms. Muscroft, I thank you for sharing data and visuals that so vividly expose the extent of demolitions and displacement in the West Bank. This is indeed helpful in putting into perspective the dire impact of settler violence and excessive use of force on the daily lives of the people in the West Bank and in Gaza. Thank you so much for this important contribution to today's discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, our last panelist is Ms. Inas Maggieh. She is the UN Women Program Coordinator in the Palestine Country Office. She joined UN Women in 2013 and has over 20 years of professional experience in key humanitarian and development domains, including in education, protection, leadership and participation, also on gender equality and women's rights. Another fitting contribution to today's discussion. Ms. Maggieh, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Mr. Neville Gertze, Vice Chair of the Committee, Her Excellency, Ms. Fida Abdelhadi Nasser, Excellencies, distinguished members of the committee, guests, and panelists. I have the pleasure and the honor to be joining you today in this event, and I thank the Committee on the Inalienable Rights of Palestinian People for organizing this side event on the margins of CSW66 and for giving the importance of the impact of displacement on Palestinian women, mainly women in East Jerusalem. With your permission, I would like to share my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation. I just need the confirmation that it's appearing on the screen. Okay. As an addition, I would say, to the very rich and sad presentations at the same time, highlighting the very difficult and challenging reality for Palestinian women in East Jerusalem, my presentation will focus on the importance of amplifying the voices of young East Jerusalemite women to achieve sustainable solutions. This year's committee or commission on the status of women focuses on achieving gender equality in the context of climate change, which is extremely important for women in Jerusalem as well, because it is an entry point for enhancing their participation in a changing world and in a world that is facing multiple challenges, including on climate change and disaster risk reduction, where policies and programs need to be in place. The UN Women's Generation Equality campaign and its global acceleration plan has placed youth as a central driving force for this agenda, simply because youth are the driving force of communities. In addition to that, youth are not taking their rightful place in shaping the world's agendas. After 26 years, after the adoption of the World Conference on Women, the Beijing Platform for Action, too little has changed. And this was highlighted in United Nations and global reports, showcasing that despite commitments made on the agenda of women's rights and gender equality, those commitments has not been translating into policies, into actions. The voices of youth at the same time were not apparent in terms of shaping the future that they want. So from the start, the Action Coalitions has established the vision through the establishment of a youth task force that has shaped the priorities. For us as UN Women, in the context of Palestine, we realized that in order to drive transformative vision as part of the Generation Equality Forum, we needed to rely on the voices of young women, mainly in the review of the Beijing Plus 25 processes. In that regard, we held dialogues with young women from East Jerusalem, aiming to get their voices and their priorities, not only as marginalized groups, but also as women leaders, that they are living a reality that is different from that is experienced by men according to what they have expressed. In their own words, women live under the Israeli occupation, as fellow members of this panel has mentioned, that they are living under very complex reality of settler attacks, of displacement. In addition to those, there are also societal restrictions facing women. One of the women has explained, we women suffer psychologically even more than the others do during this crisis. We endure long periods of time staying at home and dealing with all the stress and tension. We rarely dare to venture out. When we do, we risk being harassed by settlers. Furthermore, women, mainly the young, feel that their roles in decision-making and in providing political and social solutions are not considered. Women in East Jerusalem as well face various or come from various backgrounds and face different forms of discrimination. They overcome daily different forms of discrimination due to main three things: as being women, as young people, and young people in Jerusalem and generally in Palestine. As mentioned, they are excluded from decision making, from policy making, and from shaping the strategic directions of their people, and also as Palestinians from East Jerusalem. For women, these challenges limit the realization of their potential and of achieving their aspirations at the different domains. Because of the different impediments, unemployment rate, as an example, as data indicates, they are the lowest for women in East Jerusalem. In the 2021 labor force participation survey, it showed that the participation in the labor force for women stood at 10.4% in comparison to 34.8% for men in Jerusalem, while the total Palestinian women's labor force participation stood at 17.2% and 43.4% for Palestinian men in 2021. The labor force participation in Jerusalem is lower than the total labor force participation of women in Gaza, which stands at 17.3% also in 2021. What we have realized as UN Women Country Office and as the United Nations as a whole in the state of Palestine, that we need to work in partnership with women leaders to change the paradigm and to work with women not only as victimized, they are of course victimized, but also as agents of change. One of the dialogues that we had, where we had the pleasure of having Dr. Amani, who's on the panel with us today, women highlighted that we as women, as young women leaders, We are the driving force for social change, not only on women's issues, but more broadly for our community and society. They also explained that different layers of discrimination facing Palestinian women in East Jerusalem who come from more conservative backgrounds or women with disabilities prevent them from achieving success at the personal and professional levels. Issues related to women with disabilities are even more severe for women coming from East Jerusalem because they are not served by Palestinian Authority institutions due to restrictions on movement and access, as explained earlier in the panel discussion. Also, young women leaders expressed very powerfully that we are determined to achieve success and we work to realize our full potential by innovating and enterprising. Furthermore, we drive solutions for our communities and country when we are supported. This is a very strong message coming from women about the support that they need. Also, they highlighted that collaboration of efforts to remove barriers facing women in East Jerusalem and all Palestinians are essential to ensure a better future for all. In terms of the solutions, and I think this is one of the objectives of the panel today, how can the voices of young women reach decision makers, member states, and development partners to shape the solutions that are needed? So I wanted in my presentation today to share some of the solutions that young women have highlighted and which we as UN Women and as the United Nations country team in the state of Palestine take very seriously into our actions. First, supporting the role of East Jerusalemite young women in drawing a positive image of Palestinian and Jerusalemite women is essential. Women feel that their voice and their positive image is not very much known, is not very much apparent, not in mainstream media and not in international advocacy platforms. And they feel that they have the role to change this and to challenge the stereotypical image about Palestinian women and Palestinian women from East Jerusalem. Another solution put forward by young women leaders is that supporting initiatives that enhance the role of young women and their participation in public spaces and in challenging stereotypes that limit their involvement and leadership, mainly in non-traditional fields, including sport, art, information technology, professional, sociopolitical, and activism domains. They feel that in non-traditional sectors, they face more challenges still in domains including the arts, sport, innovation, technology. The role of women is still not very much welcomed and not very much supported. In addition to that, as mentioned earlier and as indicated in the statistics about labor force participation for women, they highlighted very much that the labor force participation and economic leadership of East Jerusalemite women, mainly the fresh graduates and young women who are struggling to join the labor force in the fields of technology, entrepreneurship, and providing them as well with protection networks in order to overcome the resource gap in East Jerusalem and any restrictions that they face after university is also essential. I want to take this opportunity to highlight that perhaps 80% of the input and of the solutions put forward by women were related to economic empowerment, simply because economic empowerment is a vehicle for attaining other rights, for independence, for protection of the other rights of women. In addition to that, supporting the role of young women leaders with disabilities to achieve their full potential and leadership capabilities in the areas of participation, community leadership, and entrepreneurship is essential. We had one excellent model of a young woman leader entrepreneur who is a woman with disability, was very much impressive, and she was advocating to also fulfill the quota of having at least 5% of persons with disabilities in the labor market that needs to be supported in the context of East Jerusalem, again, because of lack of access and restrictions on the activity of the PA. And finally, supporting the role of young women leaders in defending the rights of Jerusalemites in general within the agenda of peace and security, of women's leadership and their participation, so that the voices of young women leaders become central in shaping and defending Jerusalemites' demands through multiple local, regional, and international platforms. Women felt that there are many platforms where they can raise their voices. I believe Reem mentioned the example of Mona al-Kurd, an impressive advocate for women in East Jerusalem and for the neighborhoods facing threats of displacement. And I believe that other women also have the potential where their role needs to be supported so that their voices are present in different forums at the local, regional, and international levels. I believe also one of the key objectives of this session is how do we link the voices of Palestinian women with the Sustainable Development Agenda and with the goals? And I believe without saying much about the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda, these young women, through expressing their voices, they already link their demands and their asks and their solutions with the Sustainable Development Agenda, with Goal 5, with the different targets related to ending discrimination, to ensuring equal rights to economic participation, to promoting empowerment through technology, and to ensuring their full participation and leadership in decision-making. And finally, I wanted to share a photo of the dialogue that we had where Dr. Amani is also in the picture with Ms. Lynn Hastings, who is the humanitarian coordinator and development coordinator in the state of Palestine. And to highlight towards the end of my presentation that women were very much vocal about their determination to achieve success and to realize their potential, to innovate and to drive solutions for themselves, for their community when they are supported. Thank you very much.
Ms. Maggieh, thank you so much for sharing the perspective of young women living in East Jerusalem. I cannot agree with you more that the role of women and young women, especially young women, must be incorporated in decision and policy making. It is crucial that their views are better reflected, inclusive of their concerns and interests, especially economic empowerment related needs. Thank you very much for these very insightful presentations. Dear colleagues, this brings us to the conclusion of the presentations, and I thank you all for your insightful comments and personal perspectives. I'm really impressed by your commitment to achieving justice in Palestine. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, I would now like to open the floor for comments and questions by committee members and observers and from the audience. And I will ask Elio to assist me in identifying who is asking for the floor. Is there any takers this morning who wish to?
Yeah, I sent you a question via WhatsApp.
Great, thank you. We have a question from the floor. The question is from Nadia Ghanem from the Mission of Palestine. Once evictions do arise and families, including women and children, are illegally uprooted from their homes, what infrastructure is put in place to support these families once they are evicted? The aftermath of the eviction on women and children is also not often discussed. Could we have any comments from the panelists on this question? What happens once evictions arise, including women and children are legally uprooted from their homes? What infrastructure is put in place to support these families once they are evicted? And can we also get some comments on the aftermath of the eviction on women and children? If anybody wishes to respond, can I get an indication? Ms. Amy, do you have any ideas?
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Well, from previous eviction orders that happened in Sheikh Jarrah, I know that basically they have no other place to go. We don't. And now if we were to be evicted as well, like my family, we don't have any other place to go or other place to seek shelter. So I really don't know what the legal, if there's other means of providing shelter or providing other means of, I don't know the legal aspect to it, but I know that as for my family and other families, we have no other place to go other than renting a different place, maybe in the West Bank or somewhere else.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry that we don't have Ms. Muscroft with us now, because I would have expected OCHA to give us some indication. But if any of the other panelists have any input you wish to make on this signal.
I could
Amy?
just add, yes, I could just add to that. So I do think that our colleague from OCHA would have been in the best position to answer that, since they are in charge normally of the humanitarian response and so forth. And so there must be some structure. Of course, we are not necessarily experts in providing that, but what I can say is I can second what Reem shared, is that oftentimes, in terms of the legal framework, there is no compensation that is given. And some of the incentives that settler groups that are being supported and sponsored by the state is that they try to coerce Palestinian families to remove themselves from their homes or to evict willingly with a certain type of payment of funds or money. Of course, but once it reaches the legal system and it plays out in the courts, is there's often no compensation, and the Palestinian families are left with exorbitant fees, not just legal fees, but fees to actually pay back the settlers in damages. And so you have just this tremendous cruel phenomenon on every level, from the economic to the complete displacement and loss of home and security and one's dignity and so forth. And so in terms of the legal framework or policy framework of finding another home to offer those that have been evicted, is that's really not something that is in place from my understanding. And I can give you an example. Recently, a colleague from OCHA mentioned the really horrific eviction and then subsequent demolition of the Salhi family home in Sheikh Jarrah that happened back a few months ago. And they have been left homeless. They have sought shelter with friends and family, and currently looking for a long-term solution. But at this point, they have no solution. So this really is the reality of Palestinians living in East Jerusalem. I can speak on, at least in that sense. Obviously, that's, I'm sure, the case in the West Bank as well. But I hope that, at least from what Reem shared and then my confirmation of it, is that this is the reality, and it's a very cruel reality, and they're hit from many different angles, which really serves again as a coercive environment that ultimately mounts to a form of forcible transfer, if you will.
Thank you very much, Amy. I just want to indicate that we have a follow-up question from Nadia, and she agrees that we must address the root causes of this illegality by ending the occupation. However, what would you suggest to other activists from outside of Palestine to help support and defend these human rights defenders? How can we use social media and the media in general to avert what is being done to the six, and essentially what will be done to the others? Can I get some indication if anybody wishes to respond to that? How can we use social media better to get other people's on board? Ms. Maggieh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a very good question, and I think it's very important that the voices of people themselves, of women, of men, of the young, are those that are conveyed over social media without editing, without any additions, because they are the real and true voices coming from within. In addition to that, as mentioned by Ms. Amy, it's extremely important to coordinate the support, and the legal aspect is also extremely important, maybe to those who lack the means. In many of the cases, even those who are mandated to support Palestinians for the protection of their rights, and mainly women who bear the brunt, as mentioned earlier by the panelists, by the reality of displacement and also by the social marginalization, they are left without the support, and they bear the brunt of caring for the family, of their own jobs, of their own income security, etc. Those who are mandated to support them, they also lack the means and resources. So I think it's very important to coordinate the support. There are many organizations in East Jerusalem. I think Amy can speak more about that, who are mandated to support women and to support residents of Sheikh Jarrah. And they are known as the addresses in this case. So it's extremely important to coordinate the support and to get the prioritization from people themselves. Sometimes, sadly, there are some priorities that are identified that are not necessarily the priorities of the people in the neighborhood. So it's extremely important that these needs are identified by the people to ensure that it is indeed a human rights-based approach that's adopted. Thank you.
Grateful for your comments, Ms. Maggieh. I wonder if Ms. Cohen wants to add something to this? Amy?
No. Regarding the question in terms of social media?
Yes, please.
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that was very relevant throughout the presentations today was of course the need and the necessity to elevate the voices of Palestinians themselves, and particularly Palestinian female voices. And we saw the tremendous impact over the past year of the young activists and female voices that came out of Sheikh Jarrah that really were able to transform discourse around the Palestinian question and Palestinian displacement, around Palestinian rights, and the question regarding the Palestinian home, of how there's been ongoing displacement since 1948 until today. And they were able to really capitalize and leverage social media for those purposes in order to galvanize such a following around the world, and also here within Israel and Palestine. And so I think if there is really more of an elevation and amplification of Palestinian voices, and as our colleague Ms. Maggieh shared, of not censoring those voices, because as we see, there's a lots of censoring of Palestinian voices and messaging. And if you are able to actually get the messages and to amplify them, then that will ultimately contribute to advocacy and lobbying around these issues, and to ultimately shift discourse, global discourse on these types of issues.
Great, thank you very much for that input, Ms. Cohen. I have received additional questions. A question from David Wildman. Dear panel, each of your presentations described the disparity in treatment between settlers and Palestinians. Recent reports by Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and several other human rights organizations have described the crimes of apartheid by the Israeli government. Would you comment on how the analysis of apartheid would help international community support and uphold Palestinian rights? And then he's got a follow-up question to that as well, that some of the worst numbers of evictions, settler violence, and other violations have come during the last 2 years of the pandemic, when very few international monitors could be present. What role can the UN and international community play to provide greater protection for Palestinian families in East Jerusalem? Ms. Maggieh, do you have any thoughts on this question? And any of the other panelists, would you please indicate if you wish to respond to this? Ms. Maggieh, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. My reflection of that is that human rights are for everyone, and it is the responsibility of the occupying power to ensure protection and rights for all people, regardless of their ethnicity, of their ID type, whether they are men or women, and where they are located. And this is the reflection. What we see in the reality, that the displacement that is happening in East Jerusalem is simply not right. It is actually the responsibility of the State of Israel as the occupying power, and with the lack of any presence of the PA or any official presence of the PA in East Jerusalem, to ensure that those residents have the right to education, to shelter, cultural life, socio-political expression, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I now see if there any other of the panelists wish to say anything on this question? That does not appear to be the case. Thank you very much for that clarification, for your input on this question. I am not seeing any further requests for intervention or questions asked. And so I would like to ask Ms. Reem and Amani, if they are still with us, if there is anything else you wish to add to the conversation before we start wrapping up this morning's session. Ms. Reem Hamad, are you having any observations from what you've heard or what you wish us to hear that you may not have said previously?
No, I actually just want to thank you so very much for holding this meeting, and I appreciate it so very much. And, you know, hopefully one day we will live, you know, freely and be able to, you know, have some peace of mind and not worry about anything.
Thank you very much. We stand by you and we wish you all the best. Is Ms. Amani Odeh still with us? Doesn't appear to be the case. Colleagues, before we wrap up this morning's session, I would like to ask Ambassador Feda Abdelhadi Nasser, the Deputy Permanent Observer and the Observer State of of Palestine to the United Nations. Feda, do you wish to share your final thoughts with us? The floor is over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Gertze, and I would really want to extend deepest thanks to all of the distinguished panelists. Thank you to Reem and Amani for sharing their very moving testimonies, the reality of their lives under this unjust, cruel, and illegal occupation. And thank you also to Amy and to Sarah and to Inas for their really informative presentations, helping to raise awareness and understanding of the depth and impact of the violations being perpetrated against the Palestinian people by the Israeli occupation, and about not only the impact of women, but the contributions of women, including young women, in seeking justice, rights, and security for their families, for their communities, and our people as a whole. So I thank you all for your respective and important advocacy efforts. I think that our session today helped reinforce what we all know about the importance of the role of civil society, including women's organizations, in upholding human rights and justice, and including by seeking accountability. But unfortunately, also, as we all know, in Palestine, the space for civil society to engage and advocate is rapidly shrinking as Israel seeks to silence their voices, even going so far as to outlaw some Palestinian organizations, including those serving women, such as the Union of Palestinian Women's Committees. So we do reiterate our deep appreciation to the committee for its support to and cooperation with Palestinian and international civil society organizations, including organizations like Amin, that are working so hard, all of them, to raise awareness of the Palestinian plight and to promote a just solution to this injustice that brings an end to the Israeli occupation and the realization of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including to return to self-determination and to freedom, and that justly resolves all aspects of the Palestine question based on international law, which we believe are the keys to peace and stability for Palestinians, Israelis, and the region as a whole. And so I wish to conclude by urging all states and civil society organizations to continue and strengthen their support and partnership with the committee, and to reiterate our thanks to the committee members and observers and the UN's Division for Palestinian Rights for all of their efforts. And thank you again for bringing us together in this forum and for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Abdelhadi Nasser. Feda, thank you so much for your really moving, and we can feel the close connection you have with the contribution that our panelists have made today. We want to underline every word that you have said, and we want to remind all of us that 73 years later, this struggle needs to come to an end. And we have to work together, all of us, to continue to find a lasting solution. We have come to the end of this virtual event, and I wish to thank all of you again for your active participation today. And I thank you to those following us on social media. Your accounts have been really enlightening and have once again highlighted the importance of women's perspective and contribution to the achievement of a just and lasting peaceful solution to the question of Palestine until we realize the objective of the two states, that is Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, with East Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinian state. I want to thank the panelists once again for making yourselves available to raise the pertinent points that you have shared with us today. There will be a summary prepared by the Secretariat of these deliberations that will be posted on the committee's website, and it will be disseminated via social media. From my side, I want to thank also the Secretariat for their professional support and assistance in organizing these important events and for their backup services to all of us in the board. Thank you very much for all of you who have been with us today. We look forward to your ongoing engagement and to welcome you in future activities of the committee. And with that, I bring this meeting to an end. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.